Welcome to the next installment in my video lecture series in economics. And in this particular lecture series, I'm going to be taking a look at the circular flow diagram. And before we do that, there's a few terms that we have to go over to make sure everybody's comfortable with them. And as usual, I like to give the appropriate attribution. So here's the citation slide for any of the quotes that I use in this particular video lecture in the presentation, and it's from Principles of Microeconomics, Case Fair and Oster, Pearson Publishing, the 12th edition. So some of the terms that you're going to need to know is I'm going to be talking about a firm or firms, and according to the textbook, a firm is an organization that transforms resources, inputs, which include land, labor, and capital, into products or outputs, what they produce. And firms are the primary producing units in a market economy. Also, we need to know what economists mean by households, and households are just the consuming units in an economy. Additionally, we need to know what the product market or the output markets are. And these are the markets in which goods and services are exchanged. So when you purchase a computer, anything that you produce that's a good or a service, this exchange occurs in the product market, also known as the output market. And we also need to know what economists mean by the input markets or the factor markets, and these are the markets in which resources used to produce goods or services are exchanged. So the labor markets, capital markets, markets for land, etc. All of these are the input or the factor markets. So here we have the beginning parts of looking at the circular flow diagram. We have households, firms as the two major entities that interact with one another, and they interact with one another in the output or product markets, and this is where goods and services are exchanged, and also the input or factor markets. This is where land, labor, and capital are exchanged. So let's see how households and firms interact in the input or factor markets where land, labor, and capital are exchanged. So households will supply land, labor, and capital to firms. So households are the suppliers of land, labor, and capital, and firms are the demanders of land, labor, and capital. So for example, when you are looking for a job, you enter the labor market, you are supplying your labor, and a firm hopefully will demand your services in the labor market. So what happens when you get hired? An exchange occurs. You're supplying your labor to the firm so they can use it, and they provide you payment for the services of your labor. So this is where households and firms interact with one another in the exchange of land, labor, and capital. Households supply those factors of production, firms demand them, and firms provide payment for the usage of that land, labor, and capital. Now we want to take a look at how firms and households interact with one another in the output market. So firms supply output to satisfy the demand of households. So companies will produce video game consoles, video games, and households demand those products, and that exchange occurs in the output or product markets where goods and services are exchanged. And when firms supply us with something and we demand it, we purchase it, we provide them with payment for the goods and services that they provide for us. And you can see why it's being referred to as the circular flow diagram, because households and firms interact in two separate markets, the output or product markets and the input or factor markets. And as you can see, the flow itself is circular. Supply and demand is circular. Supply of land, labor, and capital is moving from households into the land, labor, and capital or input markets and demanded by firms. And those firms provide payments to households, and the mechanism that coordinates that is the input or factor markets. And then when we take a look at the output or product markets where goods and services are exchanged, firms supply goods and services and households demand them, so the prices are set for those goods or services in the output market or product markets, and then payments are flowing from households through the output or product markets for goods and services to the firms themselves.